October 5th, 2011. Steve Jobs is dead. Within hours, a consensus forms. Apple cannot survive without the man who rescued it. Tim Cook, the new CEO, is labeled not a visionary, but a supply chain operator, a logistics man handed the keys to a creative empire. Apple's stock drops. Analysts begin drafting the company's obituary. What almost no one considers in that moment is that this is not the first time. The world has declared Apple finished. It is the fifth. Were they right? On April 1st, 1976, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Ronald Wayne sign a 3-page partnership agreement in a Mountain View apartment. The venture carries immediate risk. Just 12 days later, on April 13th, Wayne withdraws, selling his 10% stake back to his partners for $800, later accepting an additional $1,500 to forfeit any future claims. Jobs and Wozniak launched the Apple I, a bare circuit board with no case, keyboard, or monitor priced at $666.66. On January 3, 1977, the partnership incorporates as Apple Computer, Incorporated. Former Intel executive Mike Markkula provides a $250,000 investment, giving the company the capital to mass produce the Apple II. Launched in June 1977, the Apple II becomes the company's first mainstream consumer success. By December 12, 1980, Apple launches its initial public offering. The IPO values the company at $1.78 billion, placing a 25-year-old Steve Jobs on the Forbes list of the wealthiest Americans with a net worth of $217 million. Apple has scaled so rapidly it is already outgrowing its founders. By 1983, Apple's financial foundation is dangerously fragile, behind the public triumphs. The massive revenue flowing into Cupertino depends almost entirely on the Apple II, a machine designed in 1977. While Apple scaled rapidly, rivals like IBM are aggressively capturing the corporate market, making the reliance on a single, aging product line an existential threat. To break this dependence, Apple looks to the Lisa, launched on January 19, 1983. Built with intense technical ambition, the Lisa introduces a revolutionary graphical user interface. But technical ambition does not guarantee commercial survival. With an astronomical base price of $9,995, the market rejects it. Businesses refuse to purchase a machine that costs as much as a new car. Sales stall, with estimates tracking toward a meager few thousand units. The Lisa is a commercial misfire that cannot carry the company's financial weight. With the Lisa failing to secure the market, Apple's options are evaporating. The corporate structure is bloated, expenses are climbing, and the Apple II cannot protect the company forever. The entire weight of Apple's survival narrows onto a single, unreleased project, the Macintosh. Led by a team working under intense pressure, the Macintosh must succeed immediately upon its upcoming release. There is no backup plan, no secondary revenue stream, and no time to iterate. The problem is no longer about proving innovation, but surviving a concentration of risk that puts Apple's entire future on a single, unproven bet. On January 22, 1984, during the third quarter of the Super Bowl, Apple broadcasts its 1984 commercial. Directed by Ridley Scott, the cinematic minute captures the public's imagination, positioning the upcoming Macintosh as a revolutionary force against conformity. 2 days later, Steve Jobs introduces the computer to a roaring crowd. It is a masterclass in marketing, establishing a cultural myth that immediately defines the company. But this theatrical success masks a cold commercial reality. The Macintosh is priced at $2,495, and beneath its friendly interface, it lacks sufficient memory and has no internal hard drive. The early rush of enthusiasm quickly evaporates. By the end of the year, Macintosh sales drop to a crawl, generating just 10% of Apple's internal revenue forecasts. Unsold inventory piles up in warehouses, forcing the company to write off millions in components. Instead of rescuing Apple from its dependence on the aging Apple II, the celebrated flagship creates a secondary, cash-draining crisis. The massive bet on the Macintosh has stalled, leaving Apple with a highly publicized cultural icon and a rapidly deteriorating balance sheet. By the summer of 1985, the financial damage is undeniable. On July 19th, Apple reports a $17.2 million deficit for its third fiscal quarter, the first quarterly loss since going public. Driven by a $40 million write-down of unsold Macintosh inventory, this loss ends the myth of guaranteed growth. To stabilize the business, Apple orders a sweeping restructuring. In June 1985, the company lays off 1,200 employees, cutting about 20% of its total workforce. Production lines stop and offices close. The immediate crisis turns internal focus toward the head of the Macintosh division, Steve Jobs. Jobs continues to champion his underperforming machine while clashing openly with chief executive John Sculley. The board of directors, which once tolerated the co-founder's erratic behavior during profitable years, now views his management style as an expensive liability. With warehouse shelves packed with unsold computers, the gap between Apple's public image and its balance sheet is completely exposed, setting the stage for a civil war at the very top of the company. On April 10, 1985, the internal power struggle reaches the boardroom. Chief Executive John Sculley delivers a direct ultimatum to Apple's directors. They must choose between his disciplined management or Steve Jobs' unpredictable leadership. For 2 days, the board debates the company's future behind closed doors. This is a battle over corporate governance and control. On April 11th, the board delivers its verdict. In a unanimous vote, the directors back Sculley, stripping the co-founder of all operational authority. Jobs is removed as head of the Macintosh division, his daily influence inside the company instantly terminated. He is relegated to a powerless role as a special advisor, a figurehead with no control over the organization he helped build. The corporate structure has rejected its creator, converting internal product friction into a decisive institutional execution. In May 1985, while John Sculley is traveling in Europe and China, Jobs attempts a final, covert coup to remove the chief executive. But the plan leaks. Jean-Louis Gassi, the newly appointed head of marketing, warns Sculley, who immediately cancels his trip to confront Jobs at a tense executive meeting. The board again sides with the chief executive. By September 16, 1985, realizing his influence inside Apple is permanently gone, Jobs submits his formal resignation. He does not depart alone. 5 senior engineers and managers resign with him, carrying a vital portion of Apple's original culture and product vision out of the company. Jobs sells all but one of his 6.5 million Apple shares, severing his connection to the company he built. The creator exits Cupertino, stripped of the Macintosh, the Lisa, and the product pipeline he expected to define his legacy. In Exile, Jobs spent years building Next, a computer company focused on high-end workstations. The machines were elegant, expensive, and almost completely ignored by the mainstream market, selling only a few thousand units. Next was a prestige project running out of runway. To keep his ambitions afloat, Jobs bought a struggling digital graphics division for $10 million, renaming it Pixar. But Pixar too bled money, attempting to sell a specialized image computer for an astronomical $135,000. Jobs repeatedly faced the prospect of selling the company off just to survive, before a sudden pivot to animation in 1995 offered a financial lifeline. Back in Cupertino, Apple was drifting into its own quiet crisis. Stripped of its original product focus, the company cycled through chief executives who attempted to steady the ship by multiplying it. The clean Macintosh product line fractured into dozens of overlapping, confusing models. In August 1993, Apple launched the Newton Message Pad, a handheld device that promised revolutionary handwriting recognition but delivered only public ridicule and slow sales. Desperate to defend its ecosystem, Apple licensed its operating system to clone manufacturers like Power Computing in 1994. The move backfired. The cheap clones did not expand the user base. They simply hollowed out Apple's high-margin hardware sales while licensing fees failed to cover development costs. By the mid-1990s, Apple's global market share collapsed from 16% to just 4%. The balance sheet was a disaster of escalating losses. In October 1997, Michael Dell publicly summarized the industry consensus. If he were in charge of Apple, he would shut it down and give the cash back to the shareholders. In December 1996, Apple spent $429 million to acquire Next. The transaction was a desperate bid to replace its obsolete operating system, but it also brought Steve Jobs back into the corporate headquarters. Jobs returned without executive authority, starting as an unpaid informal advisor to Chief Executive Gil Amelio. But within months, as losses mounted, the board ousted Amelio, appointing Jobs as interim chief executive. Instead of acting as a visionary savior, Jobs performed corporate triage. To stop the cash drain, he ordered an immediate 70% reduction in Apple's sprawling hardware lineup. He canceled the Newton Message Pad, eliminated dozens of parallel desktop models, and terminated hundreds of millions of dollars in active projects. The cuts laid off thousands of employees and enraged product teams. Jobs consolidated the entire company's survival around just 4 products, buying Apple a few months of financial runway through raw, unsentimental subtraction. On August 6, 1997, Steve Jobs took the stage at Macworld Boston to announce how he would keep the company alive. The solution shocked the audience. Jobs revealed a broad partnership with Apple's chief rival, Microsoft. As Bill Gates' face appeared via satellite on a towering screen above the stage, the crowd of Apple loyalists erupted in boos and disbelief. It was a moment of public humiliation for a brand built on being the anti-establishment alternative, but emotion could not override the balance sheet. Under the terms of the agreement, Microsoft invested $150 million in non-voting Apple stock. The deal secured a 5-year commitment from Microsoft to develop and support Office for the Mac, ensuring corporate users would not abandon the platform. It also settled outstanding patent disputes between the two companies, resolving years of costly legal conflict. To the Apple faithful, the alliance felt like a betrayal, a desperate surrender to the enemy. To Jobs, it was a cold, transactional necessity. The cash and the software commitment did not guarantee success, but they stopped the immediate threat of insolvency, buying the company the temporary stability it required to plan its next move. The recovery progressed through a sequence of calculated business model expansions. In August 1998, Apple released the translucent iMac, selling 800,000 units in its first 5 months and proving the brand could still attract mainstream consumers. Rather than remaining a niche computer manufacturer, the organization began systematic entries into new markets. In October 2001, Apple introduced the iPod, turning the computer developer into a digital music company. To support the hardware, the iTunes Store launched in April 2003, moving the business from physical device sales toward platform economics. The true realignment of Apple's core business occurred in June 2007 with the release of the iPhone, which established a new financial center of gravity. In April 2010, the iPad extended this mobile architecture into tablet computing. Steve Jobs operated during this era as an institutional tastemaker, embedding his personal design standards directly into the corporate engineering process. By July 2011, this continuous expansion generated a complete reversal of the company's fortunes. Financial journalists highlighted that Apple held $76.4 billion in cash, a reserve that surpassed the operating balance of the United States Treasury. Apple had transitioned from a struggling computer maker to a dominant multi-category ecosystem. Tim Cook assumed control of Apple under a cloud of intense industry skepticism. Outside observers and media analysts framed him not as a creative product designer, but as a cold supply chain operator, a logistics specialist hired to manage an assembly line rather than invent the future. The prevailing consensus predicted a slow, predictable decline without Steve Jobs. Cook answered this skepticism through structured execution, steering Apple from individual charisma toward institutional scale. The financial evidence of this endurance accumulated in steady, undeniable milestones. Apple crossed the $1 trillion market capitalization mark in August 2018. It reached $2 trillion in August 2020, $3 trillion in January 2022, and ultimately surpassed the $4 trillion threshold in 2025. This rapid scaling was anchored by fundamental technical control. In November 2020, Apple severed its historical dependence on Intel, launching its own custom M1 silicon chip. By designing its own processors in-house, Cupertino secured absolute authority over both hardware and software, rendering competitors dependent on generic components. A full decade of evidence dismantled the post-2011 collapse narrative. Apple did not shrink in the absence of its founder. It became an engine of endurance far larger than its original creators had ever imagined. In 2026, Tim Cook steps down after 15 years, initiating a corporate transition free from the panic of a forced crisis. The coming CEO inherits an organization confronting a different kind of threat, a slow-moving strategic hazard in artificial intelligence. This arena does not rely on spectacular hardware releases, but on machine learning running invisibly inside daily software. Apple must now prove it can execute a sixth reinvention under a leader completely detached from the original survival loop. Subscribe to Architects of Tomorrow for the stories that quietly change our world. Today, Apple's unprecedented scale projects an illusion of permanent safety. But permanence is a myth in technology. Every giant remains just one existential crisis away from collapse. The true test is not how a company triumphs, but how it survives its own fragility. To explore the handful of stories that quietly end up changing the world, subscribe to Architects of Tomorrow.